For those in Lower Manhattan, 20 years ago, the memory of September 11th is still fresh, vivid in the minds of those who experienced the tragedy. Joining us now is a very special person, Christina Stanton. She's author of Out of the Shadow of 9/11, an inspiring tale of escape and transformation. I actually know Christina. She's a dear friend of mine. I lived for 7 years in New York City, and I attended church with Christina. And I had not known you in the time that you published this book, which is 2 years ago. So I'm so excited for you to tell our viewers about it today. Tell us a little bit about your book and what makes it unique.
So my book is all about the attacks from a resident's perspective, a resident of the neighborhood in which the attacks occurred, and it's not a perspective you hear a lot about, because that brings in stories of what was the neighborhood like before, during, and after. I talk about the boat evacuation, the largest boat evacuation in history, larger than World War II in Dunkirk, that I was a part of, that happened in Lower Manhattan. I talk about, for instance, how pets fared in Lower Manhattan, how it was to have a raging fire in the middle of my neighborhood, how the air quality affected us on a daily basis and scared us, honestly. It was really living in a war zone. And I noticed that it was a story that wasn't told often. So whenever I would tell people about exactly what happened to us, I would oftentimes hear, "I've never heard of that. I've never heard of the boat evacuation or this and that." And I ended up writing a book about it just because I felt that it included stories that weren't out there and wasn't covered in the media for whatever reason.
I am a little over halfway through the audiobook, which is narrated by you, and it's so fun to hear it in your voice. It really takes the experience of your story to another level. One of the things that stuck out to me was the vivid detail in which you describe laying on your back after the plane crashes into the second tower and then getting out so quickly you didn't realize you were barefoot and in your pink nightgown, and then you just ran. Can you describe what those moments were like?
Right. Well, we had a terrace apartment, which, as you know, was very unusual in New York City. 300 square foot terrace that overlooked the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center site, on the 24th floor of our apartment building. So when we were on our terrace watching the North Tower burn, right over our shoulders came the second plane that swooped right in front of us, went into the South Tower, and actually the shockwaves from that plane blew us back into our apartment and knocked me out on the living room floor. So I woke up to my dog actually jumping on my torso, and I remember my husband yelling all these different things, but I felt like he was in a tunnel. I couldn't discern what he was saying. And I heard him say, "Do you want your shoes?" I kind of came to, popped up, and really was in a complete panic and ran down the 24 flights. My husband grabbed our dog, ran down behind me. And it wasn't until I got outside on the street level that I realized, whoa, I'm in my pajamas and I am wearing no shoes. And I ended up staying like that pretty much for the whole rest of the day, outrunning debris and smoke and trying to breathe, saying goodbye to my husband, being rescued by a boat that deposited us in New Jersey, in some place my husband and I were completely unfamiliar with. And then what happened to us for the rest of the day and in the weeks after, because it went on and on. We were displaced for 2 weeks, which actually surprises a lot of people to know that 25,000 of us were displaced in the days and weeks after 9/11, and what that journey was like. And certainly, it's part of a picture of the day, how it was for thousands of people. It's not a story of being in the tower. It's not a story of being in the plane or terrorism or the rescue workers, which are all very important stories. But it helps, I think, to give a broader scope and understanding of how 9/11 caused lots of ripple effects within the city with thousands of people. And I consider us a ripple effect. And again, that's the perspective of my book.
And since you were a New York City tour guide, you knew exactly how many people lived in those towers, and you described processing that knowledge of, oh my gosh, how many have passed away. And then you go through this feeling of detachment. It really sounded like you were in fight or flight mode. When did you finally start to come to grips with the emotional toll this was taking on you and your husband?
That's a great question. So we started exhibiting symptoms of PTSD right away, which I, of course, had never had that issue before. I'd never had any reason to, but and it manifested itself in me. I was completely manic. I already have a lot of energy, but it just made me literally like I'd blown out of a cannon. I was shaking all the time. I was walking like a crazy woman around Manhattan. Just I could not sit down. I couldn't relax. I couldn't sleep. And on the other end, my husband was the complete opposite. He couldn't stay awake. He was rarely awake, and so we were just kind of in our own separate hell. I also just I really had felt like I lost my footing of what this world was all about. I was so shaken to my core. So to tell you the truth, I'm from Florida. We fought the good fight, tried to get our lives back together in Manhattan, but we were suffering just too much, and we just couldn't seem to bounce back on our own. I went home to mama, as a lot of people would, go home to family and security in a place that you feel safe, because I didn't feel safe in Manhattan anymore. And I wanted to, I just couldn't bring that about myself. So I went to my childhood home and honestly got a lot of therapy, and specifically trauma therapy, PTSD therapy. And that was very helpful, doing that in a place where I felt very safe. That when we went back to New York City in January the 1st, we were ready to start over again, which is what we had to do.
Truly an incredible story. Talk to me a little bit about the points of light you saw along the way, the volunteers.
When I think back to 9/11, of course, I think about primarily the loss of life and all those almost 3,000 people whose lives were cut short that day. But I also think of all the heroes that 9/11 produced. Yes, absolutely, the rescue workers and the firefighters and the policemen who came to the aid of those who are suffering, but ordinary citizens did en masse. And I talk a lot about my book of how just small, very small kindnesses throughout the day and in the weeks after when we were displaced, and even beyond that, how that really helped to restore, let's say, my faith in humanity and help me to move on and heal. But it was people's kindnesses that just meant for so much to me. But again, 9/11 produced so many heroes, and a lot of them have been profiled, but that is what I think about that day. Also, living in Manhattan, to see the city in a complete state of mourning, and it was just one big funeral. But I remember in some of my manic walks, which again, I profile in my book, I talk about how I passed by all of these lines of people lined up to give blood for weeks after. I talk about how I passed lines of people who were at Salvation Army and Goodwills and donation depots there to drop off toiletries and food and clothing. But people really came together and just wanted to help. And I loved that. Again, it helped me kind of come back to myself and come back to this world that after being rocked to my core. But I tell you, when I think of 9/11, I think of two things. I think of the lives that we lost, and I think of all the heroes that showed up at the worst of humanity to show the best of humanity.
It's just lovely to see how the community comes together in times like that.
Yes.
Now there is a whole generation of young adults who don't remember. They don't remember when 9/11 happened. How do you hope the next generation coming up can honor those lost in the attacks?
Well, for one thing, when it comes to the younger generation, I feel a real passion to help educate, because it is something that we should never forget. I mean, I've heard people call it the end of innocence in America. I've heard people call it the beginning of the age of terrorism. And also, of course, young people take for granted of all the security that we now have at attractions or at airports, and that all came as a direct effect of 9/11. The Department of Homeland Security was created, and 20 years later, of all the things that's happened on the earth in different countries, it's still considered the worst terrorist attack in world history. It hasn't been usurped just yet. And just for that reason alone, history needs to be remembered so it's not repeated. But as far as what I want the younger generation, how I would like for them to honor it by what a lot of people are talking about nowadays is doing kindness to each other, is showing kindnesses, being a point of light, because every single person can be a point of light. And one person can make a huge difference in another person's life, and it's in large and small ways. And I know that that's a push coming from a lot of sectors around America, and I love that idea because South Africa, me and you have been to South Africa together. They have their own day of service. They have Nelson Mandela Day, which manifests itself in showing kindnesses to each other. We need a day like that, and this is a perfect day to do it.
A better message could not have been spoken, Christina, and I know you are a living testament to showing kindness to your faith community and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's take a look at the cover of your book. This can be found on Amazon. It is highly rated. Get your hands on a copy. You can also listen to the audiobook on Audible. Christina, thank you.